You're listening to Carrie Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Carrie Lutz. Well, why do people do the things they do? Why do companies do what they do? Why do some companies succeed and others not? Well, people you're about to hear from believe it's all got to do with economics, behavioral economics. And that kind of gets to the motivation of why people often make bad decisions, irrational decisions. And there's actually an ETF, so you can kind of participate in this paradigm shift in investing. Kristof Gleich is with us now. Kristof, you are CIO of Harbor Capital Advisors and a long storied career at JP Morgan. And what I really found fascinating is no finance background per se. Your original degree was in physics, which I thought was kind of cool. Dan Ariely, founding partner of Irrational Capital and a professor at Duke University, behavioral economics, and also founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight. And in that regard, I'm probably up there with you because my hindsight is 20/20, as they say. So I guess, Dan, we need to explain, because not everybody knows, many of you out there aren't familiar with the concept of behavioral economics. What is behavioral economics, and why should you care?
Okay, so some of the basic assumptions of standard economics is that people basically always make the right decisions. That we can take all the information into account, we combine it in an optimal way.
My ex-wife was exactly the same. She always made the right decision, I guess, except marrying me.
That's just an assumption that is not really tested. And behavioral economics basically say, what if we don't make this assumption? What if instead we let people behave as they behave, and let's just collect data about how people behave? Kind of like we do in all sciences, right, in biology and so on. And lo and behold, when you collect data about how people behave, you discover very different things. You discover that people don't sleep enough and text and drive and don't take care of their own health, and lots of different ways in which we behave irrationally. And in every aspect of behavior, there's its own irrationalities: in driving, in sleeping, in health, in relationships. And in my three areas of research is financial decision making, how people misspend their money; health, how we don't take good care of our health; and motivation, particularly at the workplace. And I have started looking at all kinds of ways in which people are motivated by things that are different than the rational theory. We're motivated by helping our fellow coworkers, and we're motivated by making progress, and we're motivated by teamwork. After all, people climb mountains and run marathons and write poetry and all kinds of things like that. And when you make an equation of what motivates people, you realize that the motivation equation is very different than motivation equals money or bonuses. There's lots of elements in there. So that's kind of part one. And then part two is to say, do all companies understand that? And do some companies understand it in a better way? And if there are companies that understand human motivation in a better way, will they be able to develop better human capital? And the answer, by the way, is yes. Some companies have a better understanding for human motivation, and they create human capital that is a true asset for the company. And by the way, COVID and working from home was an extra interesting period for that, because if you think about the challenges of getting people to work from home and be motivated, that was extra powerful. And I think the current labor market is also putting extra emphasis on human motivation. But in any case, the question is, do companies understand what the motivation equation is? Do they act accordingly? And can we sort out the companies who are better at it and worse at it, and invest in the companies that do better at it?
Okay.
So maybe, Kerry, if I can just jump in quickly as well. So thank you for hosting us today. And it's interesting you mentioned my background in physics. I've always appreciated taking a scientific approach to investing, taking a scientific approach to understanding, the world around us. And I think if something that science teaches us, it's that our understanding is always being refined and changing and evolving over time. And innovation plays a key role in science. It plays a key role in investing. You talk indeed about the financial survival network, giving your listeners the tools to survive and thrive in the new economy. Well, the new economy, I think, it's all, it's the knowledge economy. And so what we've done with Dan is we've tried to make what we think is potentially the most important factor in investing that's been overlooked to date investable, and that is people. If I were to ask you, when most business leaders say the following, our most important asset is what? The answer is typically people, because it's true. And yet, when you look at how people are accounted for in businesses, they are not accounted for as assets on the balance sheet of businesses. The cost of investing in those people, paying those people, improving those people goes through as a line item on the income statement every single year. And the corporation or the company's balance sheet gets no credit for those investments. It's not recorded on the company's balance sheet as an intangible asset. And we all know the most important asset in any business is the people. It's the heartbeat of that business that drives the value today and drives future value creation. And so what we've done with Dan's, really unique career of research in this domain is we've tried to make what we're coining the human capital factor investable. And it encompasses using, creative different types of data, Dan's behavioral economics expertise is really the driving force behind that. But the hypothesis is, if you can measure the value of businesses that do a great job of managing human capital over the long run and over the cycle, there's going to be alpha in that signal, and those businesses are going to outperform over the long run, all else being equal. So what we've done is we've created an ETF called the Harbor Corporate Culture Leaders ETF with the ticker HAPPY, HAPY. And then also when this goes to print, we'll be live with its sibling, which is also HAPPY, HAPI. And these are ETFs focus on investing the businesses with the highest human capital factor scores.
Okay. So I think when most companies say our people are our biggest asset, it's lip service. And they really don't necessarily mean it, because the first thing they do when they hit a tough patch is you lay people off and you cut salaries, you cut benefits. And
so let me ask you a question here. When we say that people don't mean it, I fully agree with you that they don't act this way. But when somebody says, I want to go on a diet, and then you serve them a chocolate cake and they end up taking the chocolate cake, what would be your conclusion? That they're not really on a diet, or that just short-term thinking is overpowering their long-term thinking? I think it's more of the second. And I think that to some degree, what Kristof has said is that because we don't count human capital in the balance sheet, when companies are in a bad time, they basically go into short-term thinking, And because they don't see the human capital, they do the opposite things to what they should be doing. But we think that if we can actually get people, companies, to understand the power of human capital, be in front of their eyes, we might get them to act in a different way. It's just that right now, it's not measured, it's not appreciated, and because of that, short-term thinking sometimes wins over the more rational thought of saying, let me invest in the thing that would get me a long stream of revenues here.
Hmm. Okay, I'll buy that to some extent. Expedience often. Hey, if you got no food on the table, you might find that you become a thief, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's very possible. So short-term gain, short-term loss. And even though if you get caught, you wind up with a record, and that's going to just make things harder for you in the long run. So I guess the thing is a systemized approach towards actually quantifying this. This is what you're attempting to do, and
that's right.
And
you know, there's something we call the things that are visible and invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what do you know about what your neighbors are saving or what insurance they have, and not much. On the other hand, you ask what do you know about what your neighbors are spending, you know much more, right? You see cars and I don't know, a renovated kitchen and branded clothes. And when you think about how is our motivation driven by things that are visible and invisible, the visible things take precedent, not because they're more important, but just because we can measure ourselves around them. We can focus on them. We want to, do whatever the Joneses are doing. And the same thing is true about human capital. As long as we can't measure it and we can't see it, and it's not part of the asset class, it's going to be underweighted. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to, first of all, create an ETF that recognizes it. But we want also companies to start appreciating it internally and changing how they view their employees and how they view their human capital.
Okay, so you've come up with ETFs to do this. How have they worked out?
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Osino Resources is a Ross Beatty-backed gold exploration company in mining-friendly Namibia. Osino's district-scale land package is situated near 2 producing gold mines, one of which Osino's management team previously developed and sold to B2 Gold. Osino's founders and management are experienced mining professionals who have already successfully developed and sold 2 companies in the past 7 years. Osino has an excellent shareholder base with Ross Beatty owning 20%, insiders 5%, and resource capital funds 8%. This is an exploration company with drills turning that you'll definitely want to pay attention to. Osino trades in New York under the ticker OSIIF and in Toronto under the ticker OSI. To learn more, go to osinoresources.com. That's osinoresources.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
So we launched the ETF in the flagship ETF at Happy with a Y. Was the ticker we launched in February of this year. And then actually this week, we're launching Happy with an I. So we're still, very much in the early stages of creating awareness around this new investment factor. What I would say is, according to our research over the long run, this investment factor, depending on some of the constraints that you put around it and the type of tracking error that you're willing to take, can generate sort of 3 to 4 percentage points of growth through the market cycle alpha. What I'd say as well, Kerry, just picking up on your point earlier and your skepticism around management really believing whether or not they really think people are the most important. We actually give 0 weighting or credence to what management say in terms of how we identify these businesses. Words are cheap, they're free, right? And what we want to see is we want to see how the businesses invest and how their cultures kind of translate ultimately into the employees with higher motivation. And so what we've done with Dan's unique background and skill set is essentially tried to design a new investment factor. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with things like value as a factor, or momentum as a factor, or quality or growth, that are all kind of well-known factors now that have been around for decades. We think there's actually a hidden but very intuitive factor called the human capital factor, that you need to be very creative with the types of data that you use to measure this human capital factor. So maybe Dan, why don't you describe what some of the kind of the elements of the human capital factor are, just to sort of bring this to life for listeners?
Yeah, so there's lots of things that could become part of the motivation equation. And as we said in the beginning, not all of those elements are intuitive. So for example, we find that absolute level of salary doesn't really have a substantial alpha. On the other hand, perception of fairness of salary matters a great deal. We find that health benefits, retirement benefits don't make a big difference. But we find that feeling appreciated makes a big difference. And let me ask you, Carrie, what do you think is the number one way for companies to destroy employee motivation?
Well, I would say public reprimands probably is number one.
That we don't have data on that, but that's a really interesting idea. The thing that we have a lot of data on is bureaucracy. And if you think about bureaucracy does a few things. First of all, it tells the employees that they're not trusted by the company. Yes, sure, you can take somebody for dinner, but we want 16 records and a video, documentation of the whole thing and a declaration. It also tells people that their time doesn't matter. Sure, we ask you to do job X, but we're putting a lot of obstacles in your way to do it. And it also kills innovation, because it means that it's easiest to do things as they're being designed, and any change you want to make is becoming harder and harder. So bureaucracy is a huge barrier to productivity. And on the positive side, we find that psychological safety is very important. Why? Because you want people to feel free to express their ideas. You don't want them to feel that they're being ridiculed, or somebody looks them badly if they say something. So we want an environment that is not bureaucratic, that people feel appreciated, that people want to work extra hard. And in general, if we separate motivation into intrinsic and extrinsic are things like salary and bonuses and retirement benefits. We don't find evidence that those things are very important. On the other hand, the things that have to do with intrinsic motivation, the fire that is burning within individuals, to how much they want to achieve and accomplish and run and so on, these are incredibly important. And this is why feeling appreciated and fairness and low bureaucracy and high psychological safety are incredibly important. And the workplaces that get that get a lot of dividends from it. Now, it's also interesting to think about COVID. COVID was a very interesting period, and for many reasons, but one of them was that the relative role of intrinsic motivation became higher. Why is that the case? Because think about the kid. Maybe the kid is in 7th grade. If the kid is in school, the teacher can say, sit straight, don't talk to your friends, put your phone down, focus on schoolwork. If the kid is at home, now the kid is working only from intrinsic motivation. The teacher has no control over them. They can turn the teacher off if they want to on video or audio, or both. And therefore, the role of intrinsic motivation is increasing dramatically. The same thing happened during COVID at all kinds of workplaces where people were working unsupervised from home. And yes, we're not exactly like kids, but we're also not that different. And to the extent that some of the work from home is going to remain, I think that also the emphasis on intrinsic motivation is going to stay with us.
Okay. So as far as your ETF goes, so You've got a list of companies. Can you share some of them with us?
Yeah. So I think what's important to remember is this is a systematic, disciplined approach that crunches millions of data points. And where we source the data from is creatively looking at what employees are saying about where they work. So when you go back to your comment and cynicism about management and CEOs really believing what they say about their businesses, we would agree, and we think by far the most important way of measuring this is by looking at what employees say about where they work themselves. And there are some public and some proprietary data sources where we try and tackle this question, and we try and sort in what employees are saying into different signals around motivation, alignment, psychological safety, and so on and so forth. So this isn't a discretionary process where we're going in and evaluating businesses and giving them some kind of metric score. It is very much a quantitative and data-driven approach. What one example company that is in the index is Lululemon Athletic. Very famous company, does a great job of engagement. It's all about being active, as we are with this ETF as well. And the ETF invests in about 80 different businesses on a sector neutral basis. That's the HAPY, HAPY ETF. And the more diversified sibling, HAPI, does this on a sector neutral basis. So runs with a lower tracking error versus the S&P 500 and with about double the number of companies.
Okay.
But Dan has done a lot of consulting over the years to the Fortune 500 companies, and has lots of practical hands-on experience in terms of trying to increase efficiency and motivation and engagement. So I'm sure Dan can speak to numerous examples of some of what he's seen in his hands-on engagement.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I also want to mention something about Kristof's comment about this not being at our discretion. Basically, you can think about this data approach as if we're looking at rainfall to predict crops, let's say coffee. At some point, coffee blossoms and you can estimate how good the quality of the crop will be. But if you track the rain, you can get an early predictor of how good the crops would be. And to some degree, this is what we are doing. In most companies, motivation is not something that will have a return today. It's something that has a return over time. If people are motivated, there's higher human capital factor. People work harder, they come up with changes, with improvements, innovation, all kinds of things like that. And it shows up over time. Now, at some point, the innovation would come up and the market will be able to appreciate it, only that we get it earlier than other people because we're measuring something very, very early on. And if you want some examples of interesting things that companies have done, one example is Hyatt. Hyatt, the hotel chain, at some point did something really elegant with the people who are working at the front desks. This was in one of their hotel chains, and they started it in London. And they basically told the people at the reception, they said, look, if a customer comes to you with a challenge, any challenge, we're giving you discretionary spending. You can spend anywhere between £0 and £100, and you could get anything you want for that client, all the way from a glass of wine to dessert to whatever. It's between £0 and £100, and any option that is available to us, you could decide what you want to do. And what happened is that it really changed the process. Instead of somebody at the front desk having to say to the unhappy guest, let me go back to the back room, talk to my manager, and I'll be back, they could resolve the problem there and then. The customers were much happier, and interestingly, the people working there were much happier and more motivated as well. And they measured really a substantial improvement in how the hotels were created.
So all right, I'm staying at Hyatt next time. So is it the more you complain, the more you get?
They might now that you're saying it out loud, they might mark you. But the specific chain,
right?
The specific chain they did this was Andaz. But yes, when people were complaining, they rewarded them. And I don't want to say try it, because I don't want you to make up complaining. But it really is a very interesting thing. If you think about how frustrating it is to call one of the cell phone companies and what kind of customer service we get, when you get somebody on the other side who is truly delighted is apologetic for what went wrong and delighted to come up with a solution with you, everybody is improving. Or there's another example, I'm kind of, just because it comes to mind, there was a study that compared Walmart with Target, and they compared what happened when customers come and there's something that is not on the shelf. And what they found was that at Walmart, where employees in general are treated not as well, the employees say, let me go and check it, but they don't go and they check it. They just go and they come back and they say, we don't have it. Whereas in Target, people actually go check, and if they have it in stock, they bring it back. And you can see how easy it is to change motivation and make it profitable for everybody. The client would, the customer would hate going back home without the thing that they wanted. The employee, we would want them to do the best to serve customers. And if motivation is higher, basically everybody benefits.
Okay.
I think those are just really good examples of how nuanced this is, Kerry, in terms of there isn't a blunt instrument that you can kind of take, and it's not like value investing where you can say, okay, let's look at price to book, price to earnings, price to cash flow, create some generic metric, and then look at what companies look cheap. 25, 30 years ago, what I just said was actually reasonably complex in terms of trying to get at that factor. The data wasn't ubiquitous as it is today, but now that version of value investing is pretty simple. And now to try and eke out an advantage in value investing, you got to be very, very sophisticated in order to do so.
Sure.
I think what's interesting about this is it's so nuanced, and those examples of whether it's Walmart versus Target or the autonomy given at Hyatt are microscopic examples which play out millions and millions and millions of times over throughout hundreds of thousands of companies, millions of companies all over the world. And the companies that do a good job in aggregate of that create the environment for those businesses to produce great returns for all of their stakeholders, but particularly their shareholders, over the long run. And again, I would just say what is, we think, unique about this approach is it's incredibly difficult to measure, which we think with our partnership with Irrational Capital and with Dan, that we've got a great mousetrap that we can capture, measure, isolate this factor, test it in different environments, and ultimately make it invest.
I think we got the gist of it here. Maybe next time when we talk, we'll go over a few more companies like Tesla and others. Right now, we don't have the time to do that. Can you give us a place where we can find out more about this, connect with you guys on the web? How do you do that?
Yeah, the easiest way to go is go to www.harborcapital.com and click at the top of the page under products, and you'll see Happy listed there.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much. And hey, if you've got a question for either of these gentlemen, shoot me an email, kl@kerrylutz.com. We'll get you an answer. I'm curious about it myself. Kind of want to see where this thing goes. It could be an interesting trend. And hey, we will definitely have you guys on again and go a little more in depth into several companies that are in your portfolio and why you picked them. In any event, again, hey, give us a shout out, YouTube comment, or just send us the email to kl@kerrylutz.com. And guys, good luck, and we will definitely talk to you again very soon.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.